Well, good morning, church. How are we doing today? Good, good, good. It is definitely summertime, summer attendance, summertime weather, summer everything. And I'm in no way trying to dog on the denomination of the church that I used to go to. But actually, July coming up right now is the time where this denomination that I was a youth pastor at before coming to Fredericksburg, they would do this thing. And if maybe you've heard of it, you know I'm not lying. Where around July they do a shuffle. And basically the higher ups will say, all right, you've been pastoring in this area, you've been pastoring in this church, and you've been pastoring in this church, and now swap. And like they just move them around. Like you don't get actually a say in it. They would just move people around. So it's kind of like it made church. I was going to say it made church fun. That makes church fun too. It made church fun because it's kind of like, oh man, like, is the pastor going to stay or not? And it's not even just them deciding it. It's unto the Lord and unto this, denominational structure to decide that as well. And I was thinking about that as I'm getting into today's topic for us. And I was thinking, what if at your work, that was the way it would work? I mean, kind of it is. We could probably all be fired at some point. But what if it was really this reality where like you would just show up one day and they would go, well, the time has come. And you no longer work here, and we're going to move you somewhere else, and like you're done here, and you might have been like midway through a big project, and like, okay, well, either the rest of the people are going to take it on, or they're going to scrap the project, but you're going either way, and whatever work you were, able to get done up until that point is what you got done, and that's pretty much it. And there will be a performance review, by the way, of sorts at the end, right? Ecclesiastes, the book that we've been studying and that we're going to be studying for I don't even know how many more weeks, but I'm excited. Anyway, the book that we've been getting into with Ecclesiastes here, the preacher has been trying to figure out what is the meaning of life, searching for meaning, and he's been coming up short. And he tried the work thing, working himself, toil, making something of your life with what you do. And he's like, that's not enough. And then last week, John Yanati did a fantastic job, didn't he, of really talking through the preacher kind of laying out, okay, and again, it was actually the best one, I think, out of all of them for like what we most likely would think. If you're going to find meaning, it's going to be in the list that John went through, that the preacher went through. And it's like, all the fun stuff of the world. Like, try all the fun stuff. And the preacher goes, here's a problem. I could do it better than all of you could. Because Solomon was, well off enough to be like, oh, women, how many? Nice houses, how many? You built a house for yourself. Okay, you homesteader, I built 50 houses. And he just goes ahead and just rudely tells you that he could do anything you could do, he could do better, anything, yeah, like that. And so that wasn't it. And then he even gets into like, well, maybe wisdom. That's actually where we started the series. Maybe wisdom. And he's like, even that ends up not being enough to be everything that you need. So we've got work, we got pleasure, we got wisdom. None of them are going to be quite enough to be themselves. He says, no, instead they're meaningless. Vanity of vanity, vapors, smoke and mirrors, if you will. All just a ploy to keep you from realizing how meaningless it all is. Yeah, right? Encouraging stuff here in the summer. And so somebody might respond and go, well, okay, if that's the case, that like all the pleasure and all the work and all the wisdom, at least let's just make the most of life. Right? Yeah. Come on, y'all with me? Yeah. That might be a response. Okay, well, let's just make the most of life. And I've said it at the beginning of the series, my Clint Eastwood version of the preacher. I picture him going and just kind of huffing and going, life. Like, well, make the most of life. And he goes, life. Oh, man. Funny thing that life is, isn't it? What with it always abruptly ending with that death thing? Yeah. I feel like, he's just the buzz killer that he is, because he's just going to remind us. He's like, the preacher, as you read Ecclesiastes, the 12 chapters, he's going to repeatedly turn his gaze, and by you reading his words, by us reading his words, he's forcing you to turn your gaze to the fact of death, the reality of death. He's going to keep on going, your tombstone is incomplete, but also inevitable. Right? Aren't you glad you're here today? Your tombstone, it's the inevitability of death. The fact that, like, you have that one date. We all do. We're in the room because there was that one date. Oh, it's a boy, it's a girl. Oh, wow. And then you and I are working on the dash right now. But the day will come where, sorry, you're no longer working here. Right? sorry, you're no longer working here. And Blue Oyster Cult might be able to swoon in this happy way. Don't fear the reaper. But the preacher is kind of not on board with that. He's like, no, I'm kind of not okay with this death thing. It's kind of a serious thing. This is why it's a reality that brings up numbers of times in the 12 chapters, like staccato hits of sadness to drive home a point that he's trying to make. In fact, even at the end of the book, and this gets us into our first chunk of it, we're going to be all over Ecclesiastes, but Ecclesiastes 12, he gets poetic in describing the aging process that leads ultimately to death. When he says, and it's getting, get ready because it's creative, he says, remember also your Creator in the days of your youth, before the evil days come and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them, before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened. And we're starting to get into the metaphor now, because he's talking about your eyesight being diminished, right? Sun, the moon, the stars being diminished, and the clouds return after the rain. In the day when the keepers of the house, they keep me up and upright, legs, start trembling. You ever see an old person start to walk and tremble a little bit? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the strong men, those vertebrae that hold you up, keep you strong, they are bent. And the grinders cease because they are few. Hard to chew on the food because you got fewer and fewer teeth. And those who look through the windows, the eyes are dimmed. And the doors on the street are shut when the sound of the grinding is low and one rises up at the sound of a bird. And all the daughters of song are brought low. He's painting this picture of just like everything kind of coming to a close, everything kind of coming to an end, everything's kind of wearing out. And he says they are afraid also of what is high and terrors are in the way. The almond tree blossoms, the grasshopper drags itself along, and desire fails because man is going to his eternal home. And the mourners go about the streets. Before the silver cord is snapped, or the golden bowl is broken, or the pitcher is shattered at the fountain, or the wheel broken at the cistern, and the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. A lot of water metaphors, because water's always signified life, right? The fountain of youth, water's always signified life. And so he's saying, basically, before the well runs dry, make the most of the life you have right now, because he ends it in verse 8, vanity of vanity, says the preacher. Everything in your life, including life, is vanity. But the preacher isn't just saying that because our bodies wear out. It seems to make everything we end up doing before that meaningless, like he'd tried before. He's saying it goes even further than just being meaningless. In chapter 6, he says that there's an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them. So this guy who gets everything just doesn't seem to have the extra ingredient of being able to go, I have everything. And he says, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a grievous evil. And then he's going to paint a ridiculous picture. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years so that the days of his years are many. He's really trying to drive home a point, yeah, right? But his soul is not satisfied with life's good things. And he also has no burial. No one's there caring enough to bury him. I say that, and he's going to be extreme here, I warn you, that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it's not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest that this guy doesn't have. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, which is, for those math nerds, 2,000. So yeah, even if he lives 2,000 years, again, he's really trying to drive home a point. He gets to this point, he goes, well, even if he were to live 2,000 years, do not all go to the one place? Doesn't everyone die is kind of what he's getting at, the inevitability of death. And what's interesting, before we get into that real quickly, I thought it was fascinating that literally this week when I'm working on this, I'd also seen on the news, I don't know if anybody has heard of Pavel Durov. I've never heard of this guy, but that's the guy who came up with Telegram, created the app Telegram, is worth billions and billions and billions of dollars, which, again, the newsworthy part is this week or something like that, maybe last week, he decided and laid out his will for his 100 children plus to figure out how they're going to get the billions of dollars. And I was like, I'm sorry. Mind you, he's 40, so I was kind of like, Josiah, we got Josiah, and 100 kids. He's got 100 children. So literally, irony is like I'm reading Ecclesiastes talk about Pavel. Even if he has 100 kids, the funny thing is, whether he's content or not, and I don't know if he is content with his billions of dollars, he's got to make plans for where the money's going to go because he's going to go at some point. As inevitable as the reality of the sun this morning rising, and then this later today it will set, as inevitable as the fog may come. But eventually it will leave. No matter where the fog is, it eventually leaves, yes? As much as that's inevitable, that is the way of man. Yep. Not only did Solomon see this, but his father saw this when he wrote poetically in his classic book, Psalms, what isn't all him, but a lot of him. Psalms 144, 3-4. David wrote this. He said, "O Lord, what is man that you regard him, or the son of man that you think of him? Man is like a breath. His days are like a passing shadow." Smoke and mirrors. That's not just the stuff of life. That is life itself. That's what he's saying. That life itself is smoke and mirrors. Our lives, vaporous, passing, momentary. So I know that there's going to be some moments, again, we've already gotten to laugh, but this is heavy stuff today, okay? I will just warn you that this one's just a heavy one, and the weightiness of it ends up for some of us, and I like to call things as they are. Anybody else? Yeah? I feel like the weightiness of talking about death for some of people in the room, and some people who aren't in the room but should be and are going to watch online later, is so weighty that we just don't like it, so we kind of like avoid it. Like we avoid it like the person who maintains too much eye contact with us while we're talking to them, or the person that, as you're talking to them, is just like way closer than you feel comfortable with. You immediately are thinking, I want to get away from this. So if you do need to, it's right here, and in the back as well. Because this topic gets to feeling so heavy, so weighty. And but the thing is, you can't escape talking about death. Right. I mean, actually, you can escape talking about death, I guess, but you can't escape death. So you might as well talk about it. Pastors love to make this joke about it. You know, they say the statistics are pretty grim. 10 out of 10 people, you know, that kind of thing. But it's true. I mean, everybody dies. Death is, in that way, the great equalizer. Because you rich people, those billionaires, they can funnel a lot of money into living longer. But, and the thing is, like, the wise person might live longer than the fool. But they're going to die, and then the contented person might live better life than the discontented person, but they're going to die. Discontented poor people and discontented rich people. Contented poor people, or contented rich people, and that guy that Solomon was pondering when we read that he said in verse 6 of chapter 6, even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do not all go to one place. And just to be clear, he's not referring to not all go to one place as in like heaven or hell. He's saying we all go to that one place, the grave. Yeah. And Tertullian, maybe famous if you know your church fathers, the 3rd century church father, who, by the way, died in 240 AD because everybody dies. He said this about death: "It is a poor thing to fear that which is inevitable. But I certainly get why we would." Yeah? Can we be honest to church this morning? I get why we would fear death. I mean, at the very least, everything that I've been working on having, I'm not going to have anymore. You know? All my stuff. Let's be honest to church this morning, yeah? So here's one of my first things. Naked you came into this world, and naked you return. Yeah. She's not in the room anymore because she's probably taking care of Josiah, but she saw this in my notes, and I was like, oh, so now you know I'm going to call you out. My wife Madeline loves to occasionally encourage me to release from my hands some of the possessions that I'm going to eventually have to release anyway. Just getting ahead of it a little bit. She never poses it that way, by the way. Like, hey, you're going to die and this stuff's going to be, you know, but the reality is, like, she's like, we need less stuff. Let's have less stuff. She does try to get me to get rid of that. And here's the thing. I will oftentimes protest. I'm like, no, I want that. I need that. That is important to me. But one day I won't be there to do that anymore. And the thing is, one day she won't be there either. I don't know which one of us is going to go first, you know, but one day there's no breath in my lungs to protest, and also there's no reason for me to anyway. I'm not here to enjoy it. Solomon saw plenty of like strong and weak and rich and poor figures in his life probably lose everything that they had at that moment. Everything that they gained, no longer theirs. And I think that's part of the reason why, as he looks at all these things happening under the sun, that he wrote in chapter 5 of Ecclesiastes and says, there's a grievous evil that I've seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, like gripping him so tightly that like it hurt his life. And then those riches were lost in a bad venture. So you made a bad investment. And the problem is this guy's a father of a son. So he's got somebody that he's supposed to be like passing on an inheritance to, but he has nothing in his hand. And then he gets to the reality that this guy is going to experience because he had a bad, business deal, but also the reality that every single person is going to deal with. As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away in his hand. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go, and what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness and much vexation and sickness and anger. He's talking about the thing that we see even now in modern day. The man or the woman keeping crazy hours, right? Driving themselves, hustling. I'm just hustling. You see him all the time. How are you? I'm busy. I'm working on the thing. Working. Unwaveringly devoted to getting the dollars and dollars and dollars that they need so that they, or gave them the dollars or what dollars can buy. And all that vexation, he says, all that sickness and all that anger for something that either can or will get thrown out or redistributed at your eventual demise. He's like, you're working so hard for something that's not even going to get to outlive you, really. Jesus would tell his own wisdom literature parable about a guy who had worked really hard. Again, he's kind of taking the same principle. And Jesus says there's a guy who works really hard, and his fields produce so much that he goes, my gosh, what am I going to do? I'm going to build bigger barns for myself. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to have more things for me. And then in that story that Jesus tells, God then on Judgment Day, which is that same day, because who knows when we're going to die, the guy dies and God goes, you fool, which for wisdom literature is usually a good sign that whatever they were doing was not wise. When God calls you a fool, you're like, oh, don't do that guy. Don't do what that guy did, right? Yeah? And he continues in Luke 12 and he says, you fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things that you've prepared, now whose are they going to be? You were thinking of you the whole time. You were living your life for you, and you were doing all this stuff to make sure that you had a good life, and you were planning ahead for your life, but then here you died tonight, and now what? And so, naked we entered, naked we return. As much as pastors love to joke about the 10 out of 10 statistic, and I went to church a lot, so if you don't know pastors' jokes, this is another one. Pastors love to joke when it comes to this topic about how I've never seen I don't know why I always do a southern accent, but I do, and I will for the rest of my I don't know how long life. Pastors love to joke. I don't think any of us have ever seen on the way to the funeral home or way to the grave a hearse followed by a U-Haul, right? That stuff's staying here, But the joke's true. Like all this stuff, unless you're a pharaoh and you want it to be buried with you, in which case it just gets buried with you. It doesn't go with you. You stay there. Your body does. Your stuff stays there. Your soul somewhere else. That's the reality. And as much as the cheesiness is there with the pastor's joke, the truth is in it as well. And while Solomon, this is why Solomon lamented his hard work that he'd put in for so long to go ahead and work on the kingdom of Israel, because Solomon was king of Israel, right? He works hard on the kingdom of Israel. He wants to be a good king, and he wants to build a good kingdom. David had done a great job. The guy before him, not so much. Saul. Anyway, David done a good job. Solomon's going to build upon that, and he really did. Yeah? Right. Come on, y'all. This is what, because we got put ourselves in Solomon's shoes when he says what he's going to say in chapter 2 now. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be wise or a fool, yet he's going to be master of all for which I toiled and used my wisdom under the sun. This is also vanity. And if you know your biblical history, do you remember what happened after Solomon died and his son Rehoboam took over? That's what happened. The very thing that he was going, oh my gosh, if I die, who knows if my son's going to be an idiot. Maybe he wrote that because he already kind of knew. Oh, we're in trouble. Rehoboam's probably going to be next. And so in verse 20, he says, so I turned about and I gave up my heart up to despair over all the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who didn't even work for it. This is also vanity and a great evil. He says there's the opportunity for despair when you look at this reality of death. When you really ponder the reality that all your stuff is temporarily yours, but just temporarily, can lead to some despair. Yeah? Yeah? But Solomon sees it as worse yet. That's what I feel like I keep on doing in this sermon series. I'm like, but don't worry, it gets worse. So the preacher preaches on to us about the raw reality of this world under the sun that we're living in verse 11 of just the first chapter. He goes, hey, guess what? Not only is all that true, but there is no remembrance of former things, nor will there be any remembrance of later things yet to be among those who come after. And then back to chapter 2 in verse 16, he says, for of the wise as of the fool, there is no enduring remembrance, seeing that in the days to come, all will have been long forgotten. How the wise dies just like the fool. Again, not just like the fool, because the fool might die in a different manner than the wise person, right? A fool does something foolish and dies for that foolishness, but they die same as a wise person dies. So you get what he's saying and what he's not saying? Yeah? Okay. So he says, because of that reality, I hated life. I hated that this is the way that life is, because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and striving after the wind. He says this, and I know, again, none of this is just warming up our hearts today. Hopefully, we'll by the end of this, we'll get there. But the reality, we're still in the section of this series where we're going through the preachers, like, trying everything at life to make sure that we've tested everything to see what's going to give us great meaning. And he's basically going, death is a nullifier. And so again, it's not going to be happy, but it's good for us to, because he's going to say, at the end of the day, you are forgettable. It's the gone, but forgotten. Again, I don't know, like, let's see. How many of you remember what you had for lunch yesterday? Okay. Serve day people are raising their hands. So like, I remember because it wasn't my choice. The best turkey sandwich you've ever had in your life. Anyway, so not many hands on lunch yesterday, but how many of you remember your first job that you ever had? Okay, because that's more important than lunch, right? You remember your first job, jobs are important then. So because that's the case, I'm not going to ask you what your great-grandfather had for lunch on one day, but what was your great-grandfather's first job? Yeah, but first jobs are really important. In fact, if I were to say, what's your great-great-grandmother's name? Her name might not even, unless it was a family name, and then it made it easy because it just got passed down, you may not remember great-great-grandma's name. And I'm saying that because what Solomon just said is that's kind of the reality of life. You know, we die and are mostly forgotten. And that's just not because we're like us. We're just kind of like, it's not because we're not as important. Like, I mean, Joseph, the guy who got his story made into a Disney movie. Come on now, Prince of Egypt. That guy's pretty important, yeah? Pretty memorable in some ways, but not for everyone. Exodus 1:8, the story of Exodus and the slaves in Egypt. It starts off with the idea that, wait, I said Prince of Egypt. That's not. Moses was the Prince of Egypt, wasn't it? Yeah. I just now realized that. Cool. We'll edit that in post. But Moses got his title because Joseph, who saved his family. Joseph was pretty memorable too. See, I forgot.
But Joseph got one.
Yeah, he was Prince of Egypt too, okay? Just so we're clear. He was second in control. So, yeah. Anyway, the point is that the Bible says that there arose a new king over Egypt who didn't know Joseph. And if you know the story of Joseph, that's like, wait, how on earth could you not remember the guy who literally, because he interpreted the dreams of the king in a miraculous way that nobody ever could, spared your nation from utter demise and allowed you instead to become the most powerful nation in that time period? But the king of Egypt is like, sorry, who is what, Joseph? Not ringing bells. Yeah. Ecclesiastes 1:4. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. We are fleeting and passing, but the earth, it still stands here. You know, I was thinking, that means Mount Everest is never thinking about the Roman Empire, right? Mount Everest is never pondering the Roman Empire and all that. It's just been here before that and during that and after that. We may think a lot of ourselves, but the vastness of creation is just kind of like letting us pass through it. And it's this morbid context that we're finding ourselves in. Again, happy Sunday morning to us all. This is the preacher's position that helps us make sense as we interpret things that he's going to say, like this in chapter 3. It's that context of him going, this is the reality of life, that he says, I said in my heart with regard to the children of man, that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beasts is the same. As one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast, for all is vanity. All go to one place. Now, again, pause. So I'm going to clarify this in a second, but just to make sure we're understanding how to interpret this. All go to one place. All dogs go to heaven is not the proper interpretation of this. He's just saying we all go to the grave. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of the beast goes down into the earth? So I saw that there is nothing better than that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring him to see what will be after him? I'm so excited because I already know in the weeks ahead we're going to get into this passage even more. But let's just kind of make sure that we understand. There's a lot that we could think this was saying, these verses are saying, that they're not saying. One, all dogs go to heaven, that one. I don't know, okay? I'm not saying they don't. Just saying, I know cats don't, but anyway. Another joke pastors love to make. Anyway. Or he's not even arguing that there is no heaven. He's not even saying, like, who knows if we go upward and downward. He's not going to say that there is no heaven. He doesn't believe that. He does believe there's a heaven. Or he's not going to argue that we are just beasts and that we are not distinct as image bearers of God from beasts. He's not arguing that either. In the special style of wisdom literature, basically what Solomon is doing for us, and again, I am so sorry that you're here today. You should have gotten the memo that the other half of the church did. Because I'm just really, but basically he's going and sitting there and he's like, isn't it something that the squirrel that you just barely missed on your drive into church today is going to die someday just like you? That's what he's doing to us. That's what he's saying, the beasts of the earth. He's going like, isn't it wild that, that we end up going to the grave just as much as our dog does? He literally even mentions dogs, by the way, in one of the verses that we're going to get to at the end of the sermon today. But let me just get us there. Ecclesiastes 9:4. A living dog, which in that day was not like, Fido that you have like dressed up for Halloween or special occasions. Dogs in their day and in most of the world still are these scavenger, gross things you definitely want to keep away from. Lions, you also want to keep away from, but man, are they majestic. They are beautiful. Lions are stately. But you know what he says? A living scavenger is better than a dead, stately lion. Ouch. Death not only is the great equalizer of humanity then, it is also, again, it equalizes humanity, right? No matter no matter how big your bank account is, we all die kind of thing. But it also is equalizing us with everything that's living, because everything that's living ends up dying. And that way, it is also the great, not only equalizer, but the great humiliator. Because when he said, who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and the spirit of beast goes downward, he's not saying, I believe, it's impossible to know. He's just saying it's impossible for you to go ahead and say, I've been there. I can tell you, because I've had firsthand experience, I know what happens to our spirits after we die. Because everyone that dies is dead. I mean, I know there's movies and all kind of stuff, and there's afterlife experiences, but I'm saying, what he's saying is basically, that's the humility that we all have to exist in. That at the end of the day, that's beyond our experience, that's beyond our scope. Because he asked the question, who can bring him to see what will be after him? So here's another point I just want to make. We can hardly wrap our minds around life, let alone an afterlife. This is the humiliation, and not like embarrassment, but I'm saying like the humbling that the preacher is bringing us to. He's going, you can hardly understand. Can we have a little bit of church today? Okay, thanks, Matt. Okay. How many times, because Matt's the only one really, how many times, Matt, sorry, now this is not going to be good, but have you done something and you're like, what was Matt thinking? Yes? All the time. Oh, let's work on that. Anyway, we've all had moments like, I don't even understand myself, let alone understanding somebody else, let alone understanding all of life, let alone he's saying what happens after life. Solomon's going, that's the thing about death. It really gets you to realize, oh my gosh, I'm in I'm in over my head. I'm in out of my depth. I don't know what I'm going to, like, so Solomon wonders at the spirit of life. In verse 5 of chapter 11, you'll see he kind of goes, I don't even know how babies, like how the spirit comes into us when we're first born. I don't get that. And then in chapter 12, we already saw it, he mentions that our spirit returns to God. So he understands that our spirit returns to God, but he's going, I don't even understand how the end pieces work. How the spirit comes into us at the beginning and returns to God at the end, let alone the bit in between. Again, not saying he doesn't believe in the afterlife. He's just going, we're all in the same boat. One of the biggest parts of our life, being death, remains largely a mystery that we are not qualified enough to solve all on our own. We need some outside help, is what he's saying. You and I, we need some outside help. We are wired, though, for eternity. Right. He says that famously in chapter 3. He says, God has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he's put eternity into man's hearts, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. We are wired for eternity, but that find out, the word in the original Hebrew indicates the comprehending, fully understanding. So God has put eternity into our hearts, but we're kind of all going, I'm not sure I fully understand how that works, that my heart yearns for it, and I'm wired for it, like I'm designed for it, but we're still trying to figure out how that works. After all, this research report is from someone who dug into studying everything that he could about all that he could when it comes to meaning and sense. But he acknowledges this dilemma, that God has placed eternity into our hearts, yet in such a way that we're kind of unable to fully grasp it. If life is confusing, how much more fully understanding what comes after it? So in chapter 6, he says, for who knows what is good for a man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow. For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? We have a chapter break here, but it doesn't break there. It actually continues in the original right into the next thing. So he's going, who's going to tell us what's good? And the good thing is that God's going to tell us what's good. And this is, again, we're not done yet, okay? There's still more. Because his what's good is going to seem maybe not so good. Here we go. A good name is better than precious ointment. Yes, right? Hey, having a lot of stuff, having nice cologne, a nice perfume, I'd rather have people talking nice about me than just smell nice. Come on now. Anybody else? Like, we're good so far. Yes. That one we're good so far. And the day of death and the day of birth. For what it's worth, he's not talking about your day of death, your day of birth. He's talking about basically a day of death, a funeral, or a day of birth, like a birthday. Just for what it's worth, I don't know about you, I prefer birthday parties to funerals, though. I would prefer going to a birthday party than a funeral, but he's going to help us understand why he said what he just said when he goes to verse 2, and he says, it's better to go to the house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for this is the end of all mankind, and the living are going to lay that to heart. So what he's basically getting at, and I think this is point 4, I don't know where we're at now, you gain more wisdom from a funeral than you do a birthday party. That's just the reality of it. You gain more wisdom, which is really helpful for living a good life and enjoying life by going to a funeral. Not like you just need to stop going to birthday parties. I'm just saying, let's put that up there, Steph. The next slide. There I was. This is you saying this, okay? Imagine you saying, there I was, going about life, foolishly, aimlessly. Until one day when I went to and it just put everything in perspective. And again, there I was, aimless, being foolish, and then I went to a birthday party. Perspective. Suddenly just, no. But I went to a funeral. And yeah, you tracking? Right. Now we get why he said what he said, that it's better, because you're going, there have been moments where maybe you or somebody you know, or there certainly is more understandable that going to a funeral, you suddenly go, you know what, I've been wasting my life, or I've been being foolish, or it puts things in perspective. Some of us, this perspective of, dang, someday that's going to be me. And even if it's just for a breath of a moment, it affects how we think about what we're doing now. And sometimes it is only a breath of a moment because, again, we want to get out of there as soon as possible. Such a bleak thought. That's why Frederick Buechner, this Presbyterian minister, author, theologian, who, by the way, he died because everyone dies, August 15th, just a couple years ago. And he says, intellectually, we all know that we will die, but we don't really know it in the sense that the knowledge becomes a part of us. We do not really know it in the sense of living as though it were true. On the contrary, we tend to live as though our lives would go on forever. I think it's in some ways the way you kind of have to live. Like you kind of have to plan like tomorrow you're going to have to pay that bill. So like you might need, if today's your Sabbath, then don't work today. But you should probably work tomorrow, because days go after each other. But the preacher is agreeing with this preacher as well. And he's saying that there's wisdom in going to a funeral. There's wisdom found in going to a funeral and just reminding yourself that this life does come to an end. Maybe walking the cemetery or kind of having some reflection time is really good because it gives you greater wisdom, which is why Moses lived hundreds of years before Solomon. He said in his Psalm 90, he says to God, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. The thing is, teaching us to number our days, numbering our days, pondering death can obviously, we know, scare us sometimes, right? Or easily cause us to despair like Solomon said he did. Because it's like, oh my gosh. Like it's a downer. It's a real downer. And we might become like philosophers and go, philosophers. I make sure I said that word right. And just go like, what's the point of it all? Why even bother? What is the point? But Moses and our preacher in Ecclesiastes, instead of seeing the numbering our days and pondering death leading to that, they see it as also potentially leading to something else. And this is the one thing. We're almost done. The one thing I want you to get from today. Death can either perfectly produce crippling despair or clarifying discernment. We are still in the part of our study on Ecclesiastes. We're basically looking at all the really just, man, I thought this was going to work. Man, I thought this was going to work. And it doesn't. And we're going to take a shift next week where we find out what does work. And then everything from then on is going to be him giving us wisdom in light of that perspective. Okay? So that's kind of where we're heading. Big picture. But we're still in that part where we're like going, death can really kind of be the crippling despair. What is the point of life? What is the point in all of this if that's the case? Or he's going to also argue that it can give us some incredible discernment. Like again, going to a funeral can change the way that you decide to invest your life, both financially as well as like time-wise. When you realize that you're going to die, you start to go, do I really need to worry about that as much? Do I really need to spend as much time on that as much? Or do I really need to, or maybe actually I should be spending more time with this, right? The classic like deathbed moments where they go, oh, I wish I would have spent more time at work rather than with my family. You're like, no, like it's usually the opposite. It's the reality that like investment gets impacted by looking at death and recognizing its reality. Also, sin and righteousness get affected. Because when we start realizing, okay, sin is pleasurable for a moment, but living the way that God has called me to and it's honoring what Jesus has done at the cross, oh my gosh, not only in this life, but eternally, that's way more worth it. And there's moments where we're recognizing that death comes for us all, that we kind of go, you know what? I want to live more passionately, more devotedly for Jesus than I have been. He's worth it, and I don't want to waste my life fooling around with sin that I know breaks his heart. And then in general, there's just general wisdom that comes from that clarifying reality of death coming for us. Because you start to kind of go, you know what's... And again, I'm now 40, so I'm old, and I get this sage wisdom that comes with being over 40, where I just go, some of you young folks, I'm just kidding. Hey, us old folks, though, don't you start to hopefully recognize some battles aren't worth facing anymore? Yeah, some of you young folks, you can do it already early. Anyway. But you start getting general wisdom of realizing, you know what, there are certain things that because I am going to die at some point, I'm going to live differently now. Ecclesiastes 9, 1-6. He said, but all this I laid to heart, examining it all, how the righteous and the wise and their deeds are in the hand of God. Whether it is love or hate, man doesn't know. Both are before him. It is the same for all, since the same event happens to the righteous and the wicked, to the good and the evil, to the clean and the unclean, to him who sacrifices and him who doesn't even sacrifice. As the good one is, so is the sinner, and he who swears is as he who shuns an oath. Again, making sure we're all on the same page, he's saying everybody dies. Okay, I told you, it's all over Ecclesiastes. Every so often he's just like, and then we all die. Like, he's interrupting himself just to say that. But here's what he says. This is an evil in all that is done under the sun, that the same event happens to all. Also, the hearts of the children of man are full of evil, and madness is in their hearts while they live. And after that, they go to the dead. But he who is joined with all the living has hope, for a living dog is better than a dead lion. There's that verse we saw earlier. And then here's one of the big things we're ending with today. For the living know that they will die, but the dead know nothing, and they have no more reward, for the memory of them is forgotten. Their love and their hate and their envy have already perished, and forever they have no more share in all that is done under the sun. Their time has come and passed. The living, though, their time is still going. The dash is still going. As encouraging as today's been, I'm sure, for all of us. This is why this sermon, this message, the preacher, as he introduces himself in Ecclesiastes 1, is so important for us. Because here's the thing. Being alive gives you the distinct opportunity of still doing something about your life. I know it's a downer that you and I are going to die. I'm not here to go ahead and be like, quickly turn our faces away from that. Because actually, I think that's the point of this right here, is that we do need to know, yes, but then there's eternal life after that. Jesus has purchased that for us. But we die. Our bodies, we will die here. And having that perspective gets us to go, but I get to do something with today still, right? Yeah, you do. Okay. So then I'm going to get to doing whatever God has for me to do today in a peace and in a joy and in a clarity that I didn't maybe have before that. Because Ecclesiastes 6:2 said that this is the end of all mankind, and the living are going to lay it to heart. Grew up on a song by Switchfoot. This is your life. Are you who you want to be? You know, asking those kind of existential questions like, am I who I want to be? Am I doing what I want to do? There was a moment back when I was a youth pastor, and Switchfoot was probably writing that song, that in a coaching moment, they had us write down what we wanted at our funeral, what songs we wanted played, who we wanted to carry our casket, what we hoped they would say, what we hoped we would be remembered for. And I think those kind of exercises are sometimes kind of good for us. I want to be known as a loving and generous person. Okay, great. Are you doing that? Are you being loving and generous? I want you to imagine, kind of as we end here today, that, actually, can I borrow my child? He's asleep. This is great. You're not going to, okay. Oh, yeah. The casualness of being able to, hey, yeah. Okay. So this guy, at 4 months, all he's really known and seen in this time, mostly, because he's not gotten out when cold, is trees with leaves on them, right? And so he goes ahead and he looks out and he sees these trees with all these leaves. Imagine if you were to tell him, and he was to understand, that actually all those leaves are going to at one point go from the green canopy above him to a whole array of browns and oranges and yellows and all these different colors. And then they're all going to fall off the tree and not be there anymore. His little brain would not be able to compute that, right? You'd be like, what? And then what he might want to do is go, no, I want the leaves up on the trees. And he grabs some duct tape and tries to put them back onto the trees. How silly and foolish that would be. This is the nature of life. The leaves are green now, aren't they? Aren't they? But you and I know they're going to change colors, and then they're going to fade and they're going to fall. So to recognize that reality of our life as well, that grave, serious reality, is one that's really, really helpful to us, as much as it is perhaps hurtful to us as well. Because, Ecclesiastes 8:8, in the New Living Translation, it says, none of us can hold back our spirit from departing. None of us has the power to prevent the day of our death. There is no escaping that obligation, that dark battle. You can pull it down just a little bit more than that. Thank you. Yes, a little bit more than that. Because if this life and its pleasures were all that there was, death would be the most meaningless producing thing in the world. If this life and all that it had was all that there was, that would be the end of it. Like, what would be the point? But if it's not, if the reality is that God has set eternity into our hearts because it's real and he wants us to always be living with an eternal perspective, then we can love more profoundly, even in our limitedness. We can forgive more freely because of the grander scheme of things. We can enjoy, and again, I'm just already getting ahead of myself, but I'm excited that's where he gets. We can enjoy the pleasures of the world, the pleasures of the day-to-day in a different way because we recognize these are gifts along the way that God has graciously given us to enjoy, pictures of his kindness and his goodness towards us. We can have a sense of our lives having greater meaning because what Russell Crowe said in Gladiator was true. What we do in this life echoes into eternity. I want my life to matter and to mean whatever it is that God wants it to mean, so it's better for me not to make it more than it is, as if I'm immortal and I will live forever, and I live in a way that kind of pretends like that's a reality. I also don't want to live in a way that like, oh, there's no meaning to life because of death. Rather than being given to despair, I want us to live in a way that goes, you know what? It can have clarifying discernment. So let's not turn our eyes from our gravestones, but instead ask God, would you give me, instead of despair, wisdom? Would you help me to process it that way? Let's do that together. Let's pray. God, we thank you that life is a gift, and that we see it as such, that we recognize that we are, in the scheme of eternity, we are like babies. Our scope is so limited. Our experience, our understanding. You don't dishonor us by, again, belittling us as though we're children. You call us children that you love, but you speak to us. You reveal yourself to us. You've given us the scriptures, and you've given us so many other things to enjoy and to delight in. But God, because of that limitedness, would you remind us that you hold eternity in your hands? God, that you would give us, instead of despair, you would give us discernment. That as we look at the grave topic of death, that we would recognize that, Jesus, you conquered death in the grave. But that doesn't mean that we don't still have to deal with physical death as a part of this world as it is right now. So God, we thank you that moments like this exist for us to have our eyes turned to this topic so that we can live the way that you want us to. We can live wisely, fully enjoying, fully alive in you. God, we thank you that you hold our lives in your hands. And for as many days as you have for us to be on this earth, God, would we honor and glorify the one who is worthy of more than we could say, the one who is the king over all creation. God, we thank you